Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about why I don't require documentation from my students in order to excuse absences. So to start out with a little bit of contextualization, I teach at a university. I teach at Penn State University Park. I teach first-year composition and business writing, both of which are required attendance courses under university policy. And one sort of caveat that's worth being aware of with this video is that different programs have different requirements, whether that's different universities having different requirements, different departments, whatever it is, right? So you may be teaching in a program where they will require you to collect documentation from your students. If that's the case, then you don't have that much of a choice, right? If it's an institutional requirement, then it's an institutional requirement. Whether it's a good one or not, you can decide for yourself. And there are valid reasons to collect documentation from students. Before I get into what those good reasons are, I'll clarify what I mean by documentation. So often in university courses, there are, Penn State calls them excused absences. I don't think that's an unusual term. And it's sort of self-explanatory what an excused absence is, so the term works quite well. Basically, there are particular reasons you can miss a university class without that missed class penalizing your grade for attendance. You're still responsible for the work that you have to do, right? So the material that you were supposed to learn, any assignments due unless you specifically get an extension from the instructor, all of that the student is still responsible for. But if attendance factors into the grade, then an excused absence would not count against you, right? So that's fairly straightforward. There will probably be other policies connected to that. But typically the types of things that universities count for excused absences, in my experience, are things like religious holidays, legally required things like jury duty, military service, severe illness or injury, either to oneself or to a close family member, university-sponsored activities, like if you're on a profession, or if you're on a university sports team or something like that. Those kinds of things typically count for excused absences. There are types of documentation that can be provided for most of those. So often, if you are on a university sports team or university band or something like that, your coach or someone in that hierarchy will give you a letter to give to your instructors, and maybe a digital letter, physical letter, whatever it is, that says these are the dates that this student is going to be traveling for the program, whatever it is. Traditionally, I think religious holidays, there's not documentation that people ask for, in part because proving that you are actually a follower of a particular religion is a very fraught thing. But then, and things like military service, like you will often be able to get a version of your orders that you can share with your instructor. The same thing for jury duty, like they will send you a letter, you can give a copy of that letter to your instructor, whatever it is. And then the other one is illness or injury. And this is really the one that I think is most problematic, and I will talk about that. But for illness or injury, the traditional documentation is something like a doctor's note. One sort of beneficial thing is that most universities have some version of, at Penn State it's called University Health Services, but they have some version of doctors or a clinic or whatever it is. Or they have a partnership with something local that students can go to, typically for free, as part of tuition or whatever it is. That may not be a universal thing, but I think it's fairly common. So some programs will require documentation, right? You will have to give your instructor a doctor's note saying, yes, this person is sick or injured. You'll have to give them the letter from your coach saying, Jenny's student is going on this sports trip that the university requires. You will have to give them your letter from your commanding officer saying, Jimmy's student, no relation to Jenny's student, asked to be away for 2 weeks because they're legally required to go to this military training, whatever it is. Some programs will require that. Some programs will leave it to the instructor's discretion, which I think is a better way of doing it, generally speaking, with the caveat that then students don't have consistent requirements across their instructors, which I actually don't think is the end of the world. But for me, personally, this is entirely my own opinion, my own practice, my own pedagogical values. I don't believe in requiring students to document the reasons for their absences. Partially, this is because I believe students are adults and they're responsible for themselves. Obviously, that doesn't apply to like middle school, high school, elementary school, whatever it is. But in university, students are adults. They can make their own decisions if they want to. And I believe I've had this happen before, right? Where students have lied about why they have missed a class, and I've excused it anyway. The reason I think I know that has happened is there used to be this service on the internet that you could search for a particular term within a specific geographical region, and whenever that popped up on open social media accounts, this would like catalog those for you. So I used to occasionally use this tool and either search for my own name or the title of the class that I was teaching and just sort of try and gauge what students might be saying on social media about it. And I had a student who had told me that they were missing class because their grandmother had died. And I said, fine, my condolences on your loss. The absence will be excused. I then checked through this service and saw that student had posted something to the effect of, just got out of English class, thanks, Grandma. I prefer to think that the student lied to me about their grandmother's death, rather than their biggest emotional reaction to their grandmother's death was being pleased about not having to go to my class. It's possible their grandma was terrible. I don't know. I'm not going to judge. I don't assume that. But I am willing to, I consider it giving that student the benefit of the doubt to assume they lied to me rather than that was their genuine reaction to their grandmother's actual death. And personally, I'm fine with that, to be honest. Like, my attitude toward this, I guess, is in the vein of I would rather 100 students lied and didn't have their grades penalized than one honest student has their grade penalized for not being able to document something. Right? So, like, I'm not going to ever say to a student, all right, you are claiming that your family member has died. Show me an obituary, or I will penalize your grade for not being here. To me, that seems incredibly problematic for reasons that I feel should be quite obvious, right? Like, if that is a student who has genuinely just lost a family member, or I've had students whose roommates have died during the semester, I've had students whose best friends have died either at Penn State or at other schools, etc., etc. If I say to that grieving person, I'm sorry for your loss, prove it, that negates the sympathy expressed there, right? Like, and to me, that seems ethically unconscionable to say, during your time of grief, I demand for this general education class that the university requires you to be in, even though you are probably not interested in it, that you prove that someone close to you has died. To me, that's massively problematic, and I don't want to do it. I think it's wrong to do it. The same thing with being ill. I guarantee you, I've had any number of students who have sent me emails saying, "Oh, I'm sick. Can I miss class today?" And I say yes. And I guarantee you, I've had any number of students who have sent that email and not been sick. And I don't care, to be honest. Because again, they're adults, they can make their own choices. They're still responsible for the material. Realistically, if you skip class, it makes your life harder in terms of actually passing the course, because you still need to know the stuff that we were doing in class that day. But I also don't really believe in demanding doctor's notes, because that's the other very common form of documentation. Students on sports teams and the university band, the Blue Band at Penn State, they tend to be very forthcoming with their letters for that, and I don't really want them, to be honest. It's just a piece of paper. They may have switched to digital letters, which I'm actually more fine with. But it's just a piece of paper that I keep in a folder for the duration of the semester. I ask students to just email me whenever they're going to miss, just remind me why they're missing, and I will tell them what we're covering that day. I don't really want that piece of paper, but they're sort of contractually obligated to give it to me as part of their being on the team or the band or whatever it is. So I accept that. But the one with requiring medical documentation, I have much more of a problem with. In part, and this is a very common observation, a number of people have said this before, so this isn't anything new. In a country like the United States, where healthcare is prohibitively expensive, and many people do not have access to health insurance or health insurance that will pay for things like checkups and preventative healthcare, etc., to demand that a student go to the doctors and spend money, which often students don't have disposable income, and often their families don't have that much disposable income. But that prohibits students without the money for medical care from actually seeking out that care or from taking care of themselves, right? If you know that you can't afford to go to the doctor and your grade is going to be penalized if you can't provide a doctor's note, then you have an incentive to go to class while sick or injured. And if you go to class while sick and you're contagious, you are spreading that disease. And I would prefer, generally speaking, that not happen. I don't really want to get sick because of students. That's an inevitable part of teaching. I accept that. I'd prefer it doesn't happen. But I don't really want a bunch of my other students in a class to be sick either. And that's easier to prevent if a student who is sick does not come to class and spread the germs around. Especially for first-year students, that's slightly irrelevant because they're mostly living in dorms, which are basically just hives of bacteria and germs and whatnot. Anyway, but that's irrelevant to my point, which is that I don't really want my class to become a mass spreader event or minor spreader event. I mean, I've capped classes at 24, so, it's not like thousands, but whatever. It doesn't matter. My point still stands. So there's that element of it, right? That students who cannot afford to go and seek out medical treatment are inherently at a disadvantage in terms of providing official medical documentation to justify absences, which means they are more likely to try and come to class, which means that they are more likely to have difficulty recovering from whatever it is that they are experiencing because they are pushing themselves rather than resting and recuperating, and they're more likely, if it's an illness, to spread that illness to others in the class. Now, you might reasonably object that a place like Penn State has university health services, and many other universities have some sort of on-campus health service as well. That's true. However, I've heard from multiple students that university health services often take several days to actually schedule an appointment, right? So if you fall sick on a Saturday and you can't get an appointment until Wednesday, if you have to go to your Monday and Tuesday classes while ill because your instructors demand a doctor's note that you don't have yet because you haven't had your appointment until midweek, all of the negative impacts of forcing students to come to classes while sick still apply, right? So this is my sort of issue with this is for things like deaths of people close to them, I feel that it's immoral to demand students provide documentation during their time of grief. For things like illness and injury, I think there are class or financial reasons to not demand documentation, and I feel that there are practical reasons to not demand documentation because students may not have that yet. And for me, for my money, and again, you don't have to accept this in your own teaching practice, but for me, if a student tells me, I am missing class for this reason that falls within the excused absences, I choose to believe them. I would rather believe them and have them lie to me than doubt them and have them be telling the truth. For me as an instructor, I think that is a better ethical standpoint to adopt. That because I am on the side of my students whenever I can be. And in terms of accepting their word that they are missing class for a justifiable reason, according to Penn State's list of things that are justifiable, I choose to trust them.